Well, in a moving and powerful address to the U.S. Congress earlier today, Ukrainian President Zelensky called for a U.S. backed no fly zone over his country. The Biden administration has pledged more aid to Ukraine, but will that be sufficient? Here to discuss this and more is Senator Steve Daines from the state of Montana. He sits on the Senate Finance Committee, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, the Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, and the Indian Affairs Committee. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Good to join you, Tony.
Let's start with President Zelensky, a powerful speech this morning. I played a clip of that just a moment ago. He ended his speech. Most of his speech was not in English, but the closing part where he appealed to President Biden was spoken in English. Tell us what it was like in the room there this morning.
Well, Tony, it was, frankly, it was heartbreaking that video that President Zelensky showed of the pain, the suffering of the people of Ukraine, those mothers, those children, the elderly that are suffering under the evil of what's going on with Vladimir Putin and this invasion by the Russians. But it also showed us, Tony, what leadership looks like. President Zelensky, the people of Ukraine, they're warriors. They're inspiring the entire world to get behind Ukraine and to call out Russia and isolate Russia, whether it's by sanctions and so forth. And so you're seeing this Russian economy absolutely tanking. It's a pretty good chance we're going to see a default of the Russians on their debt here the next week or two, as they're holding Vladimir Putin and his evil regime accountable. But I'm reminded, Tony, when I was growing up, when I was attending college, studying engineering years ago, the first president I got to vote for was Ronald Reagan. And Reagan was all about peace through strength. And I contrast that to President Biden, the weakness, the timidity of the president. And perhaps his doctrine is war through weakness. When you exhibit weakness with these thugs, these dictators, those who seek authoritarian control over people, you've got to stand up strong against them. And the hesitation this president has, President Biden, is cost us dearly. And that just was the contrast I saw today of what leadership looks like with President Zelensky, contrasted what a poor model of leadership with President Biden and weakness.
Unfortunately, as you said, this has significant implications, not just here for the United States, where, our economy is feeling the pain. But as you said, I watched the video that President Zelensky showed, and it was heart-wrenching to see. And that's one of the things that's different in the age in which we live, where we actually see these events unfolding in real time. And we see the devastation of war and aggression that is being put forward by Vladimir Putin against the peace-desiring Ukrainians. So let me ask you this question, Senator Daines. What's the discussion now that we're almost 3 weeks into this war? We are seeing, the world is watching as Russia and Ukraine is 3 weeks into this. Will America step forward to support a NATO-backed no-fly zone? Are we just going to continue to provide humanitarian aid? What might be the way forward?
Well, I think the way forward, Tony, is a way forward that actually President Zelensky put out today in his 30-minute speech. What he said was, if you are not able to provide a no-fly zone, he pivoted to an alternative. A no-fly zone is a means to an end. That's to control the skies. But I don't believe we should enforce a no-fly zone, because that puts potentially U.S. pilots, NATO pilots, in direct conflict with Russian pilots. So I think that is an escalation line that we should not go across. But what he did ask for was additional S-300s, which would be anti-aircraft missile systems. He said aircraft. Now, I think what he's really saying is MiG-29s. The Poles have those 28 MiG-29s. I believe we should transfer those to the Ukrainians. Let the Ukrainian pilots fly those out of Europe and let them go fight. That's, I think, the right answer. I think that gives the balance of letting the Ukrainians control the skies, but we've got to give them the tools they need to win that fight. So that's where I think is the right place to strike the right balance here. I'm sure we don't escalate, but at the same time, make sure that Zelensky and the Ukrainians have what they need to win.
I mean, the anti-aircraft missiles and artillery is good, but it's defensive. And you're right, to give them the planes so that they can go on the offensive and control the skies themselves is essential. As we saw just after his speech to Congress today, this theater in Mariupol being bombed, that was providing safety and harbor to citizens. So the Russians becoming more aggressive in their attacks. But as you talked about the courage, the bravery, the boldness of the Ukrainians fighting back, it does appear that in the negotiations where there's now talk about if they may reach an agreement and we may see the cessation of of the conflict there in Ukraine, the way forward from there, how do we keep Russia from being able to set up a puppet government in Ukraine, since the Ukrainian economy is going to be devastated by this war?
Well, I don't think President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are going to allow a puppet government to exist in Ukraine. There's 44 million Ukrainians that frankly despise Vladimir Putin and will do everything they can to live under freedom. Tony, back in September, late September, I had several Ukrainian leaders came to my office here in Washington. In fact, literally just off to where I'm looking here to my left, about 20 feet. They were leaders from Odessa, of course, that beautiful port city in the Black Sea. It was one of the deputy mayors, a former member of the parliament, a current member of the parliament, and others. When they finished the meeting, their primary ask was, please stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And we were pleading with Biden to do that, and the Democrats. And we were opposed by the Democrats and by Biden in doing so. That was their number one request. But when they left my office, they gave me a mace. It's about this long, the great big head on it with spikes. And they presented that to me, and with the Ukrainian colors in the bottom in silk tassels. And they said, Senator Daines, we're giving this to you because each of us has one of these maces on our desks, every one of us in Ukraine, as a reminder of what it is to live under tyranny. They were fearful at that time of a northern invasion from Belarus via the Russians, or of course the frontal assault that's happened through Russia by the Russians. But they're not going to stand for a puppet government. This fight will go on until the Ukrainians are liberated and have driven Vladimir Putin and his evil thugs out of Ukraine.
Well, and I hope the role that the U.S. will play at that point is to hold Russia accountable for the devastation that they've brought upon the Ukrainian people, and force the Russian government to pay to rebuild that nation. Certainly where we are financially as a nation, we can't afford to do that, but we can keep these sanctions in place and continue to squeeze the Russian government until they put forward what they've destroyed in Russia and they rebuild it. I mean, in Ukraine, and rebuild it.
Well, I agree with that position, Tony. I mean, these are freedom-loving people. They're a faithful people. You know, look, the legacy of the Christian faith in Ukraine is remarkable, and there's been virtually almost a revival in Ukraine over the last several years, where there's been more religious freedom and the ability to express their faith openly in that side. They're not going backwards. And that's why Putin, I think, has clearly bitten off more than he can chew. They expected Ukraine to fall, they being the Russians, within the first 2 or 3 days, and that Zelensky would flee the country. Well, they misunderstood the strength of first President Zelensky and second, the Ukrainian people. They're rallying behind this president. So I think one of the undertold stories at this moment, Tony, is the resistance of the Ukrainians and how successful that has been to this point, and how there could be a turning point, some point where the Russians just lose their will to fight. And we're starting to see signs of that in the battlefield. So it's still early. This thing's going to go on for quite some time. But we should hope and pray for the resilience of the Ukrainians, that they would repel the Russians and that they would be victorious in this battle.
I think you're absolutely right. Senator Steve Daines, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.